Today on the Coach of What podcast, we have a very special guest. He was a wrestler coming from the state of Michigan. During that time, he was a four-time state qualifier, including bringing home his individual state championship. He went 210-11 and ended up being the number 23 ranked prospect in the nation for his weight class coming out of high school. After that, he went to the next level competing at Michigan State University, and while there, he earned USA Wrestling Greco All-American honors after placing 7th in the 60 kilos weight class. I also did forget to ask Coach this question during today's episode, but he does believe that the best state in the country for high school wrestling is Pennsylvania. He is currently the head wrestling coach at Cleary University. We'd like to welcome Coach Matt Santos to the Coach of Why podcast. With the world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Kason Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coach's Why podcast.
That was my Coach's Why.
Welcome back to another Coach's Why podcast, guys. I couldn't be more happy to have this guest on today. We have Coach Matt Santos from Cleary University. Coach, how you doing today?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Coach, I know we've talked in the past before about getting some kids out to you and everything, and you know I know you've had a pretty prolific history in the sport of wrestling. So as everybody knows, we're gonna let Coach talk a little bit about that. But we have a we had a top tier or top ranked high school recruit. We have a D1 wrestler here, and we have a world medalist, right? In Greco-Roman. Is that correct?
All-American, but
All-American. There you go.
I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, well, yeah, we'll keep that on the resume. Coach, so kind of before we get started in like your coaching journey and you know, as the coach, as I mentioned, I'm going to let you kind of, you know, brag about yourself, talk a little bit about where you grew up, and how you got started in the sport of wrestling, from youth to, you know, you can go into college, but really just, you know, when you got started in the sport of wrestling.
Yeah. So grew up in a small town called Pink County, Michigan. So I'm a Michigan guy through and through, first off, right? So at some point, you know, my mom and I moved to a city called Saginaw. It's just south of Pink County. But how I got into wrestling, my oldest brother hopped in there. My mom put him in there. I'm pretty sure she put him in there more of like a self-defense type of thing. But he started super late. I'm pretty sure he started kind of early high school, right? So as we all know, sport of wrestling, for the most part, you need to start, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old to become anything, right? Obviously, there's some outliers. You know, they start in high school and they kind of take off, right? But that's kind of, you know, I started off just going there, having fun, you know, just being around the kids, the guys, and the practice. And at some point, I was like, all right, I want to try this. It all stay the same, right? I just want to go there, hang out with my friends, have fun. I think it's one thing that the youth program that I was part of, they did a decent job at making sure that it wasn't super serious, right? The coaching wasn't great, but I didn't know that, right? I was freaking 4 years old, right?
Right.
So I was just there having a good time. And then as the years went on, you know, we kind of start figuring out like, all right, like this kid has some, you know, he's a little bit of an athlete, and it took a little bit for me to see some success, but you know, around probably like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, that's kind of when I started seeing a decent amount of success. And then middle school, I decided to kind of start taking it a little pretty serious. I had a set of friends from different schools that we all kind of traveled around Michigan in any tournament possible, right? And
Right.
in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I'm doubling up in middle school and high school and all that good stuff, right? And then I also, in like 7th grade, I started hitting up some national tournaments and getting exposed to different kids around the state or country rather. But yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of taking wrestling real serious, right? And then, like I said, 7th grade, moved to Saginaw, found some better coaching, finally decided what high school I wanted to go to. And then obviously the high school I decided they had some pretty good coaching, and thankfully, you know, I'm real grateful for one of my high school all of my high school coaches, right? But one in specific, Justin Brandel, because he was just coming out of college. He wrestled at Eastern Michigan.
Okay.
Obviously they closed down the program, but yeah, he came back home, and then him and I just constantly worked with each other over the summertime, a lot of one-on-ones, and ultimately I think that's kind of got me launched in high school, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah.
So did you so you started wrestling from a young age, and did you do any other sports growing up, or was wrestling kind of, locked into your mindset from a young age?
No, I grew up with typical family. You know what I mean? They threw me in a bunch of different things. For the most part, it was wrestling and football, though.
Okay.
Um, I never told my mom that I hate wrestling, right?
Right.
So kept on going back, kept on going back. I played basketball once when I was like fourth grade. That's just because I was having fun with it. Um, but yeah, never. I tried t-ball. I hated that, and I was like, baseball's done.
Yeah.
But no, it was pretty much wrestling, football, and then I stopped playing football eighth grade, and like I said before, that's kind of when I decided, all right, this is the thing that's going to get me to school. This is what's going to take care of my future. It's time to put all my time and effort into wrestling, right? So.
And so as you developed in wrestling, when did you? So I know you competed at the next level. If you don't mind, will you just let everybody know where you went when you after high school?
Yeah, absolutely. So after high school, well, first off, I went to Swan Valley High School in Saginaw. Four-time state placer. Unfortunately, I only won it once though. Three-time finalist. Just couldn't get past that. But
Right.
and then ended up going to Michigan State University. Like I said, I'm a Michigan guy through and through.
Yep.
And then I was there for a while. I was a four-time starter. Honestly, I'm pretty tough on myself, but I didn't think I had a lot of success in college. I was a little bit better in Greco. Honestly, I never wrestled Greco growing up. It was mainly because one of my teammates, Peyton Omania, he was super big in Greco, right? He grew up wrestling Greco at a very young age. He was a
Right.
couple time world team member at different age groups. At some point, I was working out with him and Sammy Jones. The year that they both made the world team, the senior world team, I was kind of the guy that was helping them out a lot, right?
I see.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of where my Greco experience became a thing, and
Started.
and obviously I became an All American in that. But yeah, and then with Cleary, got hired straight out of college, so that was kind of I'm a little bit of an outlier when it comes to that type of situation as well.
For sure, yeah, that's very rare to get right out of college, right? But I'm sure that's a blessing, of course. So, and then that's I actually have a question about that. I'll save that one for a little bit later. When did you know when you're in high school and when you were going to all these tournaments and really wrestling, people from, not only the state of Michigan, but I guess when you went to these national tournaments, when did you realize that you could compete collegiately? Like when did you know that you could make it to college? And then what was your recruiting process like? Right, like I know I didn't really spoil it, but you were like the top 25, I think like 23rd ranked wrestler out of that recruiting class that year. So I'm sure you had a lot of people coming after you. So what was when did you know, and then what was your recruiting process like, being not only from the state of Michigan but ranked?
Right, right. Um, so I mean, I knew I could go to college and wrestle at a pretty young age. I was pretty blessed to have some high level coaches. The club I went to starting in like sixth, seventh grade, based in Saginaw. He has experience kind of coaching kids to the next level. And then obviously my high school coach has that experience, and then the guy that I worked out a lot with that came from Eastern, he obviously has that experience too, right? So they always told me. I think the big moment for me was eighth grade. The club I was at, they had a bunch of there were college club wrestlers, but like they were coming to use our club to kind of work out, and I would train with them. And I was beating the crap out of all of them, right? So I think that was a good sign for me. I was like, oh, okay, like these are college guys, like they're stronger than me, but I'm still able to handle them.
Right.
Like I know I can do this, right? Um, it's more of I didn't know how good I actually was and where I was going to end up. I think that was the biggest question. Um, but as far as like, can I go to college and wrestle? 100%, right? That was always a thing, right?
Right.
But it wasn't until, man, probably junior year, and when I realized, okay, like I could probably do something. Um, well, maybe sophomore year. But yeah. It took me a little bit to kind of realize, like, oh, like I am pretty good, right? Because it took me a little bit to get ranked in the country, right? So, I wasn't going to all these big tournaments. I never had like the financials to do that. That's why the club coach that I joined, I was super thankful for him because he gave me a lot of opportunities, but it was always duels, right?
Right.
There's not a lot of not open, but individual tournaments that I went to, right? It was always the dual stuff. So as you know, if you go to the dual tournaments, right, you're not going to necessarily see the top ranked guys in the country. It all depends on how good your team is, right? So
Right.
it took me a little bit, right? Honestly, it wasn't until the big tournament in Michigan, Grappler Fall Classic, where I won that tournament and got a couple of ranked wins, and that's kind of when my reputation kind of took off around the country, right? Um, but and then my recruiting process, same thing, kind of going back to GFC. Once I started, I think the schools in Michigan knew who I was, and then going to some tournaments and whatnot. There were some smaller schools that were reaching out, but obviously they're just taking anyone, right? I mean, anyone that has some talent.
Talent. Right.
Yeah. But after I won GFC, that's kind of when the bigger schools started popping up a little bit more. There were some I don't know. It was like I was seeing a lot of there was D1 schools, but it was a lot of like small D1 schools. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't until I won GFC when I started getting some other bigger, and obviously the Big Ten looking at it,
Right.
all that good stuff, right? But the recruiting process, it was kind of, I didn't have a lot of guidance with the recruiting process, so I think I was very, I don't know, immature with it.
Right.
There was one thing that I cared about, and it was just finances. I was most likely going to go to the place that was going to give me the most money, right? That's
Right.
just what I needed. Um, it came down to MSU and Campbell. If you don't know, Campbell's in North Carolina. They're
Right.
actually a school right now that's going through some financial issues with the wrestling program, cutting down their scholarships and whatnot. It's kind of crazy, um, but yeah, came down to them. And, at the time, Kerry Colott was the head coach at Campbell, so
Yep.
obviously, a legend in the sport, and that was a big thing for me. Obviously, North Carolina was, a super nice state,
Yep.
but it kind of one of the best advice that I was given was by my head coach at the time. He told me literally write down your pros and cons, and so you can see what you're thinking between these two schools. And once I did that, it was kind of pretty cut and clean, right? I was like, oh, okay,
Right.
like MSU is
Michigan.
the place I want to be,
Yeah.
right? I'm in, money was pretty much the same. I'm close to home, all that good stuff, right? Obviously, it's a Big Ten school, and being a competitor, I wanted to challenge myself, right? I wanted to go to
Of
the
course.
place that was going to give me that type of challenge, right? And as we all know, Big Ten is just absolutely crazy. So,
Top tier. Yeah, for
um,
sure.
yeah,
So kind of going back to like you're saying, like it might have been a little bit earlier, but kind of like about which actually, there's like three or four things going through my head right now. So I'm trying to piece how I want to start it. Going back to like as a coach now, right? And you see kids who are going to Fargo and Virginia Beach and these big national tournaments, right? For one, I know you said financials were kind of difficult. Did you have a chance to go compete at any of the, Fargo, Virginia Beach or anything that, might be, Beast of the East, anything that was really on that level of talent at one place?
right. Fargo, no. Um, Fargo is crazy expensive.
It is, yeah,
I've gone to so mainly it was GFC, right? Obviously, that's in
right,
Michigan.
of course,
Virginia Beach duels, yes. The individual tournament, no. Um, Beast of the East. So actually, the Michigan guys, they're not allowed to go to a lot of in or while in season. They're not allowed to go to. There's a certain
Oh,
distance,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there's a lot of tournaments that some of the top Michigan guys won't go to, and that's the
I
reason
see.
for it, right?
Okay.
Um, uh, but yeah, I would say the other big one would probably Flow Nationals when they had that going
Well,
on.
yep.
I went that probably 2 3 times, but
Okay.
that was usually in Pennsylvania, so it wasn't that bad.
I gotcha. So did you think that, like, I guess as a coach now, um, and this might be a question for later, but I'm gonna skip ahead and jump and ask it now. Do you, like, when it comes to like your recruiting side of things, right? I kind of have a two-parter here. Uh, are you recruiting? First off, where are you starting at recruiting? Are you, you're Michigan through and through, so I'm assuming that's kind of like a place that you look right away. But do you look at these big national tournaments as like a indicator of? I'm assuming you do, right? Like Bo Bassett, right? These guys of national level, even yourself that got ranked at whatever point in their career. How are you looking for your athletes? Do you think that these big national tournaments are important as a coach for your of any level to be looking at? So I guess kind of how you go about your recruiting side of things, and then also, do you think that athletes who go to these national tournaments, do you think it's important for athletes to go, right? Like where I'm at, I've talked to you before. There's a lot of talent in the Southwest, but to get to Fargo, to get to Virginia, right? Obviously, that's other sides of the country for a lot of people down here, and not everybody has the financial means to get there. So, do you think that it's important for kids to get to off-season tournaments in order for them to be recruited at the next level?
Yeah, I do. I think it's fair to say that every state is a little different when it comes to the depth of their talent, right?
Right,
There's some states that to be known as a top guy, you probably have to win stage, right? But you go to Pennsylvania, if you're placing and you're getting on the podium, it's like, you're probably pretty good at the sport still, right?
right,
Um, but I think it helps 100% to go to these big tournaments. I'm not sure if I want to say if you have to, right? I think it's just something that benefits you, right?
right,
Obviously, every single coach in the country is going to look at Fargo and Super 32 and GFC and right all these big
big
tournaments, right? But
tournaments.
not
Yeah,
every single coach is going to go through every single state and look at the state tournament. You know what I mean?
yep,
It makes the process so much easier for the coach. So it just kind of makes sense that it's going to benefit the kids, right? Um, but yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I think a big thing that I'm seeing a lot now that I'm in a coaching role is that there's other coaches like you that are kind of doing their part and reaching out and telling kids or telling coaches like, hey, this is who I have. This is his story. Check him out, right?
right.
And one of the beautiful things about where we're at now, it's freaking 2024. We can simply type in a kid's name, put wrestling after it, and odds are, if they wrestled at a handful of tournaments, it's going to pop up
Boom.
on freaking
Yep.
track or flow or whatever. You know what I
Right.
mean? Um, yeah. So it's the process is relatively easy. Finding talent is relatively easy. Every single coach is doing the same thing. The hard part is convincing kids that this is a place for you. You're going to
For
get
you.
better, and all that good stuff, right? Um, but yeah, I think coaches are a huge tool that I use at least.
Playing a big part of your actual recruiting process. Yeah, I did that just because just in general, right? Like in a lot of sports, especially where we're at. I've talked to a few different coaches about New Mexico. I think I might have even told you, like, on some of our initial conversations was, there's I wouldn't say just in general, we don't have a big pool of talent, as you mentioned, right? And that's nothing against my state. It's just a fact. But there are kids who can get to the next level. But whatever sport you look at, right, like football, you're in between Arizona. Obviously, you're right next to Texas. You have Colorado, Utah, and those are some. I don't know where. I guess Arizona, Colorado, and Utah's list, but you're right next to Texas. So like we get skipped over a lot, right? And wrestling and baseball and some of those are a little bit more, have a little bit more depth, but obviously, like you mentioned earlier, you have PA, you have Cali, you have Florida, you have GA, you have Michigan, you have Ohio, right? And especially where you're at, you're in I guess regionally, probably one of the best regions for like as a whole, right? You got 6, 7, 10 states right there that you could go pick your people from, and they're going to be able to be competitive, you know? So, excuse me. My coach did that for me, and if that coach, anyways, I don't know the true story on how it happened, but I know that was a connect for him to get me the opportunity to go to the next level. I know that they had communication, so I just kind of wanted to pass that down to my kids, right? Is like, dude, you can go. My coach did it for me, blah blah blah, and so I can appreciate that. That's something that you do is open. Not all coaches are open to like listening to high school coaches, right? Some coaches have their set in stone ways of getting kids, and that's fine. And I don't, whatever it is, but I
I think
like that
that's
you
silly.
are. It is. I mean,
Yeah,
some
I
are
think
more
it's a
open
little bit of
minded,
a,
right?
yeah, I think it's a little bit of an ego thing. You know what I mean? People think like, this is what I'm doing, and it's working because I don't know. It's they want too much glory. You know what I mean?
No, yeah,
It's just
yeah,
reach out to people. You know what I mean? I talk
yeah,
to people. That's all it comes down to. Like I said before, it's real simple to figure out if a kid's any good, right? But there's a lot of other things that go into it too. You know what I mean? Like, is
yep,
the kid a good person? Is he gonna take care of his grades? Make good social decisions, all that good stuff, right? I tell my guys all the time, like every single person on this roster has a purpose, right?
mm,
It's okay if you're not the guy that goes out there and straps up the singlet and represents the CU on your chest, right? That's fine. But what else are you doing that benefits the program, right?
yep,
Are you making sure that guys aren't in trouble? Are you helping teammates in class, right? There's so many different things that come into play. It's not all about talent, right?
oh,
I
for
think that's
sure.
something that a lot of coaches kind of get blinded with, right? But yeah, I think that's silly, right? Obviously, it's going
Uh,
to be easier for me to kind of see the talent in Michigan, but it's also easier for them to come on campus for a visit, right?
Correct.
That's a big thing too. But for 100% out of state, especially, it's mainly the coaches that I'm communicating with, right?
Right. And that's I think that at the end of the day, right? Every like and I've said this to other people, right? And mostly off air and stuff, but like it's going to be hard for me to send a kid to Iowa, like to talk to the brands and say, hey, I have a kid, right? Just because they have their recruiting style, right? And same thing with like Kale and whatever, right? Not saying that they wouldn't be open to listening to it, but that kid has to have his rap sheet in order for me to send that kid, right? But like you and I, there was a few coaches I talked to that were willing to hear, and a lot of people did. Uh, they were relatively open to it. So, I guess at the end of the day, me as a high school coach, I appreciate whenever like you and I had that conversation, and any coach I've talked to, who are willing to listen to get a small town New Mexico kid out of here, especially whenever as a coach in high school, my job, I try to get kids to the best tournaments in the area, right? Like we went to
Right.
Salt Lake City, we went to 2 tournaments in Arizona. We tried to go to Colorado to get these guys in front of these guys to where it wasn't just only New Mexico talent, right? They got to face people. We have
Right.
had a guy who made it to the finals against the 3-time state champion in Arizona, and then in Utah, right? Like the top 4 or 5 guys were all like the guys who made the finals in Utah were Fargo All-Americans, Virginia Beach All-Americans type of thing. So try to put them in the best situation to when I reached out to you, and hopefully other coaches do this too. There's something there that they can look up, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's why I wanted to make an impact on them on multiple levels. And it sounds like you've had a few coaches that were also impactful to you. So if you wouldn't mind kind of like sharing, it could be one, it could be three, however many you have, kind of a coach or coaches who made an impact on your life, and kind of diving into the reason behind it.
Yeah. So, um, the first guy that comes to mind is Darren Wass. He's the owner of the wrestling club that kind of hopped into in seventh grade. He kind of did. He did a lot for me. He was the one who allowed me to wrestle on all the dual teams, work out at his club, all that good stuff. Without trying to take all our money, right?
Right.
A lot of opportunities there, right? And he's also very smart. You know what I mean? He very high level coach. He got me to a very high level when, at a young age, right? High school coaches, both of them. Daryl Birchfield. I believe he was an All-American in college. And then Justin Brandel, as I said before, he wrestled at
Yep.
Eastern. So again, going to a high school that has high-level coaching, right? And that was introduced to me because of Darren, though, right? He told me like, hey, like in this area, right? You're living in Saginaw, like this is a really good school to check out, right? And because of that, I had some pretty good partners there, all that good stuff. So, and then there's another coach, Coach Whitney. He was more of older coach. He was more of a helper than anything else.
Mm,
But at some point, he allowed me to live with him, right? And kind of took me in when he didn't have to, you know. So he was a big part as well. Just talking about coaches, right? But
right.
there's a few other ones that kind of impacted my life as far as helping technique and stuff like that, right? But for the most part, middle school, high school, those are the guys that kind of come in mind.
For sure. And I don't mean to jump back to what you're mentioning, but I think that, like you said, a little bit older coach is why it sparked my thought process was, going back to what we mentioned about like the openness to talk to the high school coaches or whatever, right? I think, traditional old school ways, it's like my way or the highway, if you would, right? But you're
Right.
younger, right? I'm a little bit younger. So like the communication side of things might be a little bit different and what we're willing to do than some of the old school coaches, right? And then not knocking that, right? Like that's what I grew up
Right.
with. I had kind of that, my coaches were hard on me, but they probably like their coaches probably think that it was soft, how they had a coach, right? Or whatever the case is. So I think
Right. Right.
a lot of it's I guess maybe might be the way kids are growing up or raised nowadays or when we were there or whatever. But I think a lot of it just comes down to personality and the openness to and generation, I think, too, on a lot of this stuff. And I know you said like technique and some of these coaches who really stick out to you. Who made that impact on your life. So sorry, I didn't mean to disregard what you were mentioning, but I think that having that old school coach is still important in
100%.
people's lives who are willing to volunteer, especially the ones who have been doing this for X amount of years, who are just doing it
Yep.
truly for the love, right? They're not trying
Yes.
to do anything other than like, hey, I'm here because I love the sport and I want to help you, blah blah blah, whatever their intention is, right?
Yeah,
Type of
no, I,
thing.
I agree. I agree. He was always there early, but like he wasn't getting on the mat and rolling with anyone, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that's kind of what I meant with that.
Yeah, no, he was there definitely for like the mental side of it and
Yes,
and
yes,
just to show face
100%.
to show that he was dedicated too.
Yes.
So I definitely understand that. So now that we've kind of talked about your young career and your college career and things like that, um, or I should say things that led you up to MSU, and you already kind of dove into how you got started at Cleary, but I would like to ask, when did you decide that coaching is something that you wanted to do? Obviously you went
Yeah.
directly
So
from school to here, so.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I knew at a pretty young age. I knew it was middle school. I can't remember if it was sixth, seventh, eighth grade or what, right? But I knew at a pretty young age that I wanted to be a coach. Um, and from me kind of figuring that out, I was always kind of paying attention to all the coaches that I had in my life and
Mm,
figuring out. I always had a decent skill at figuring out what was good and what was bad, right? I don't know why, but it was just something that I had. I mean, since my entire life, right? But with that, I did the same thing, watching my coaches, figuring out like, okay, I don't really like how they do that, or maybe they did something that was pretty cool and it stuck with me, right?
right.
Um, but went through my career. That was always my plan A. Obviously, going to college, having a good plan B was getting my education. I have two majors. My plan B was probably going to be more of like U.S. Marshal type of thing.
Hmm.
But I knew a big thing for me was I wanted to help people, right? And I knew that being a coach was going to help me be able to help people.
Right.
But I also kind of knew that I didn't want to necessarily coach high school, right? I
Okay.
wanted to make sure that I was staying at a pretty high level. But also, I think it's a huge blessing that I get to help a lot of kids go to school and give them money to do it, right? Obviously, I can't give every single kid a full ride, but I mean, you do the math of how many guys have scholarships, like that's freaking awesome, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just getting started. You know what I mean? I started at 25 years old. I'm 27 right now. Hopefully, God willing, I'm coaching at a pretty old age. That the amount of people, amount of money that I'm able to kind of bless kids with, it's mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely mind blowing to me. So I knew at a young age. But yeah, I mean, getting into Cleary, it was like I said before, it was very cut and clean. It was a very fast turnaround. I had a few ideas going on when I first graduated, right? So as people know, college is done in May. I was looking at my options for U.S. Marshal. I was looking at my options of becoming an assistant coach. I like to think I'm relatively decent with money, so I was like, yeah, I'm not going to get paid well, but I'm ready to kind of
Right.
roll with the punches. I have a very supportive fiance, and she was ready to kind of deal with that as well. She completely accepted that. And then, I have a distinct memory. We were still training uh, freestyle at MSU. And when we got
Okay.
done with the practice, and I remember the assistant coach, Chris Williams at MSU, he looks at me and is like, you wanna go for this job interview? I was like, where? He's like, Cleary. I was like, where the hell is Cleary? I don't know where this is. He said, it's
Yeah.
in Howell. I was like, really? That's actually where my fiance's from. He's like, oh, okay. I was like, yeah, I'll hear him out. So, and contacted them, got the interview set up, and probably 4 days later, called me back. I was actually at a different school, ready to kind of sign the papers and get rolling with
Do
them.
something there. Yeah.
And yeah, I had a meeting with the head coach at the school. I walked out. I got showed campus, and
Yep.
then after being kind of touring the campus, I get a call from the AD at Cleary, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, I'm taking
Yeah.
this."
Of course. Yeah.
Walked into the head coach's office, like, I'm actually not doing this anymore. Sorry, man. And he was super cool though, right? Super
Yeah.
cool. He was like, oh, I mean, obviously he was disappointed, but he was like, he sat me down. He's like, all right, you're gonna want to do X, Y, Z. Like you're in the mix of it now.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, he got me. There's a coaching convention every summer. He told me about that. Got me hooked up with that, and I went down there, went through that whole process, learned a lot there. But I think one of the biggest things that I did, and this is something that my head coach at MSU talked about. He straight up told me, he's like, look, like, you're not going to be ready for this, but if you accept that and you just deal with it, you're going to be good. And, I kind of looked at him. I was like, you're not wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have this experience. Like, I haven't done any coaching. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, I've coached kids before, right? I did a lot of travel teams, but it's a whole different animal when you have to organize everything.
It
But
is.
yeah, and that's exactly what I did, right? I knew it was going to be tough. I knew it was going to be a little bit of a shit show, but I accepted that, and I went in there, ready to put my head down and grind, man.
Yeah.
And one thing I told myself is like, whatever I do this first year, I want to continue to do it at a very consistent level. So I didn't try to do too much, but I also didn't do, I wasn't trying to just go through the motions, right?
Right. Right.
But till this day, I'm doing exactly everything that I did since day one, right? And so far, it's paying off.
Sweet. It's kind of crazy how things work out, right? Going back to your fiance's hometown, which is pretty
Right.
cool. Which it kind of mentioned something about like how your coach is like, you're never going to be ready for it till you jump in. So like,
Hmm.
what's something that sticks out to you? Being like the head coach of a program, like, and like we mentioned earlier, it's kind of weird to, or not weird, but unique to go from no coaching or straight out of college into a university to coach. So what's something that sticks out on like the coaching side that you may not have realized, just being an athlete that you had to do whenever you came over to the coaching world?
Right. I mean, everyone kind of knows. I mean, I remember at some point in college thinking to myself, like, man, like all the assistant coaches, like they get to kind of just hang out in their offices and then come down and work out, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not it, man. Like, there's so many different
Yeah.
pieces that go into it. Obviously, the head coach kind of takes the most of the workload, right? But
Right.
there's 100% things that are being passed off to the assistants, and people don't realize how much, especially at the lower level. For anyone that doesn't know, Cleary University is part of the NAI.
Mm.
I take care of everything, like the social medias, like the graphics, like all of that. Like I'm taking care
Wow.
of everything, right? So I got to worry about marketing. I got to worry about budgeting. Planning ahead. If you know, planning ahead is a big one.
Right.
We as head coaches, we don't go through things week by week, right? Like the season, the
Of
year
course.
is planned out in advance, right?
Yeah.
It's you have to be very organized and kind of be able to do it, right? Yeah, there's a lot of things that I would say that I didn't realize, but 100% the administration part of everything, that's kind
Yeah.
of something that I took for granted, right? I was like, how much can it be, right? I was like, no,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
whole thing with it, man. There's a whole
Yeah.
thing. But I mean, if you stand back and kind of think about it, it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like
Of course. Yeah.
you are the face of a whole organization. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you are the operation. You know what I mean? Like you are the engine to the freaking machine. Like you are the one that makes it run, right? So, um, yeah, it's something that you don't think about while you're going through the system yourself, right? But
Of course. Yeah.
yeah,
The administration part seems to be the most common occurrence that I've talked to, not only everybody on this season, but everybody from even myself jumping in. I was like, dang, this is so much. And I know you mentioned like assistant coaches and stuff. Like delegation was something I've had to learn and wasn't really good at my first year. Right, like I wanted to, like you mentioned, you're the face of it, and you're everything, right? And I don't know if it's, and I don't know if it's necessarily like a bad thing, but I just grew up like I mean, I was a solo child, so I didn't really have anybody to rely on, right? So it's always been kind of like I'll figure out a way, right? And that's how I was in like career wise that I do like outside of coaching is I do it and I'll figure out a way before I ask for help, which is something that I've had to learn, which is why I think talking about like not being afraid to reach out to coaches or talking to coaches like, hey, I have this thing, I have this kid, I have this issue, whatever, is not something that I'm afraid to do as much anymore, just because I've went through it. I've seen the fire. I've dropped, whatever the situation is in life and or in coaching situations, because I had that mindset. So as I've developed in life and whatever you want to talk about it, coaching as well, I've had to learn like delegation and having people not afraid to have people step in and be your right hand is something that I've had to open my mind up to. So that's cool. I appreciate you to dive in on that. And so since you transitioned to a coach, obviously some of those things that you didn't realize are now in effect. So I guess now that you've been doing this for a little while, what do you love about coaching and what do you dislike about it? Is there anything that you dislike?
yeah. I mean, I kind of touched on it before. I love the fact that I get to help out so many kids. Um, it's just every time I kind of get asked this or I think about it, the thought of how many kids I get to impact and then help financially go to school,
Yep.
And over the years, you know, give it 20, 30 years, it's absolutely mind blowing to me.
Of course.
That's 100% the biggest thing, right? One of the biggest things that I try to focus on for my guys is trying to get them ready for the next chapter of their life. I always tell people whether we love it or like it or not, it doesn't matter how much we love the sport. At some point, wrestling's gonna be done, right?
Yep.
And it's my job to kind of make sure that they do the right things now to kind of
Yeah.
line things or get things set up for them before they walk across that stage, right? So it's 100% one of the biggest things that I love about this sport. Obviously, I get to be around the sport still, so that's going to be a,
Yeah.
a plus. I love this. I love this sport. It's done so much for me. And even though it's a small percentage of the actual job, being able to go in there and roll around and help the guys with their technique and have fun with it and all that good stuff, right?
Yep. And
That's
I guess
it. Go
I
ahead.
guess you. I was gonna say, yeah. I guess you did mention the dislike part of it too. So I guess you don't really have to dive into that because I know administration is probably the worst part of at
I
all?
mean, I don't know if I would say I dislike it. It's difficult, and
Yeah.
there's a learning curve, right?
Right.
When I first got into the program, right, it was hard to kind of figure things out, but I don't know. I kind of like the business side of it too. You know what I mean? It makes me feel like I'm doing something that matters, right? I'm
For
doing
sure.
stuff that's important. There's not a lot of things that I do that's like, like doesn't really matter. Like, no, like everything that I do, like I have to be on top of it, because if I mess it up, or if I I don't put my best foot forward, it's impacting a number of different people.
For sure.
It's yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it. I don't know. I think the if I had to name one thing that I don't like, I would say more of the academic side of everything.
Mm.
I can't stand having to babysit kids to do their homework, or to go to class or
Study all,
whatever.
yeah.
It's like, one, there's a whole person for that already, right? There's academic advisors at every university. Um, but obviously, me as a coach, I still need to be there and try to help the guys out and make sure that they're doing the right things, and
Yeah.
make sure that they need help, right? But I feel like 9 times out of 10, when I come across someone that is struggling, they're just not turning things in, right? And that upsets me the most, because that's just laziness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, that probably bothers me the most. But I mean, it's the name of the game, right? So
Yeah. Any coach has that has to fight those battles no matter what level you are. So for sure,
right,
to
right,
yeah, and that's the hard part too, I guess really especially in like high school, but wrestling and basketball, like, winter sports, I should say, are really the only sport that you lose kids in the middle of season if they're not academically there, right? Like in high school, if you're a sub 2.0 in December, you're not coming back for the second half of the season. So that can be hard and strenuous for sure on a coach in general for that. Now I know that's different in college, but the idea is that you can be academically eligible, for 2 months, and then you're not in the back half. So, and that's obviously the part that really matters. So that kind of leads to, how do I guess it really leads to this question is, so you've been around some really good programs, right? When it comes to middle school, high school, collegiately, right? And I know you're building some stuff there at Cleary. So how do you build a successful culture on the level of buy-in and mindset?
man. Now that's a question and a half right there, man. I mean, there's a number of things that go into it. If I have to, say one word, it would be consistency. Um, I mean, you have to do everything right. You know what I mean? Be ready to grow. Don't have an ego, right? Because
Mm,
I mean, things are going to go wrong. Whether it's the coaching side of things, whether it's guys being hurt or guys not being eligible, something's going to go wrong, right? Um, it's just, how do you pivot, and how can you kind of see into the future and plan for that, right?
right,
It's a lot easier said than done, but you got to be consistent, right? You can't have high energy on a good day, right? But just because you're having a bad day, you walk in there and you impact the program in so many different ways, right?
right,
And kind of just reminding yourself that, right? Like I can't afford going to the wrestling room upset and not have that energy for the guys, right? I need to be the one that every single day to bring that energy and that high tempo, and let that feed off our leaders, and then the leaders kind of take control, right?
right.
Um, there's so many different things that go into it, though. Obviously, recruiting is probably one of the biggest things, at least. Like, one, I got to bring in kids so I don't lose my program, right?
Of course, yep,
And to have any type of success, you have to bring in kids that at least know what they're doing and that are somewhat athletic, right? Obviously, I get to kind of make adjustments and teach them a few things, but honestly, a lot of what I do when it comes to on the technique side of things, it's being able to see the small detailed things that need to be fixed, right?
right,
For the most part, if a kid is a elite level guy, he's coming in and knowing how to do pretty much everything, right? Like, our sport has evolved so much. at the high school and club wrestling and travel teams that the kids are very, very high level
Right.
wrestlers before they even get to college, right? But like I said before, the hardest part that I need to do is be able to see the small things that they got to fix, right? It's not just showing a technique, a very open technique, right? It's the small details and knowing why.
Yeah,
Like
that's
I
the
can't
thing
just
is why.
show
Yeah.
right. Like I can't just show something and be like, I just do it, right? I need to make sure that they understand why as well. That way they trust me, right? And they'll actually use it, right? Otherwise, they're probably just going to go through the motion as well.
For sure.
Um, man, that I don't know. It's a tough question. I mean, there's
It it can
everything.
go a lot of ways.
Yeah,
There's a
everything
lot of
goes
things that
into
go into
building
it.
a program, dude. Everything goes into building a program. But I mean, being consistent and being a pretty decent at recruiting, that's 100% going to help.
Do you think that recruiting? I know it's top on the list for your program, right? Just because you have to have numbers in order for you to keep your program alive. But do you think that when it comes to like culture, I actually asked this not too a few episodes ago, and I really like it. I need to be more consistent with this question, just because I think it's intriguing. But I know you mentioned earlier in the show that you're willing to get kids from anywhere, but you have your pipeline that you like to focus on. Do you find it easier for kids to buy in to your program because they're local, or do you find kids when they travel from farther away buy in to you a little bit easier, or is it more of just like, do you think it's more of like a coach thing? Do you think that they're buying into, no matter where they're from, you know we're not going to get everybody to buy in no matter what we think, right? No matter what it is. I know, some coaches think like 90 to 95, some are like 65, 70, regardless. But what do you think is the contributing factor to a kid buying in? Is you think staying local because they travel so far, or do you think it's just what they're walking into?
No, I would say the coach 100%. 100%. It doesn't matter if you're living right next to the university, right? If you go there and you don't like the coach, you don't like what they're about, if the culture is bad, all of that, right? That they're not gonna it's not gonna be a championship team, right? I think it's 100% the coach. Um, you know, it takes a lot of trust. So I mean, I don't know if you know this, but when I first took over the program 2 years ago, there was less than 10 guys on the team.
Oh, I did not know
I
that.
we
Okay.
literally yeah we literally wrestled a duel with two guys. And people that don't know, there's 10 weight classes in college wrestling, right?
Yeah.
But it talking about being humbled, dude. But yeah, it took a lot though for me to go out and recruit kids and for them to trust me, right? The last 2 years have been nothing but me talking about a vision, right?
Hmm.
Obviously, I'm a high goal guy, right? I'm pretty driven. Is sharing that and kind of getting them on the same page. That was the big thing, right? It had nothing to do with distance or anything like that. Obviously, for some kids, it helps that they're close to home, but there's some other schools in Michigan that are relatively close too, right?
Right.
Honestly, there's a lot of schools in Michigan that are relatively close. It took a lot for me to just sell that vision though. But at the same time, like I was able to bring in, a guy from Louisiana, some other guys from Georgia, North Carolina, stuff like that, right?
Right.
But now that things are kind of in place, the machine is kind of running on its own, and it's the vision's still the same, right? It's just clear.
Yep.
It's easier to see, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to sit here and tell the kids like, hey, this is what we're gonna do, right? We can do this together, but like you gotta trust me, type of thing, right? But now I bring someone in, I show them campus, I sit them down in my office, and I'm like, look at the guys we have. Like this is this guy, this guy, this guy. This is what they're doing, right? This is what the success that they had in high school. I have one guy that's ranked in the country now. I have two other guys that will be eligible next semester, but they also have ranked wins in the country. and there's a few other guys that I see kind of getting ranked in the country later on in the
so
season as well, right? So it's gonna be it's so much easier, dude. Like recruiting now compared to the last 2 years,
Yeah.
it is a breeze. Like I
Yeah,
can
for
literally
sure.
bring someone in and just be like, look, you're gonna get better. Like it is clear. Like the coaching staff is here, the partners are here. As long as you like how we do everything else and you like the location, it's an easy conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
So
think to answer your
you've
question,
come a long way. Yeah, you've come a
oh
long
yeah,
way from
oh yeah,
from
freaking
when we
huge.
first talked, because I think we talked about 2 years ago. Might have been your first year that you were there.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean that's awesome, man. That got me all hyped up too to see that the progression is there, which actually leads to like the actual success of the program. So like on the level of wins and longevity, or I should say, how do you continue to grow your program, and how do you get to a successful program on like the win side of things and like the longevity side of things, and then how do you sustain that over your tenure there, or even just in general? How does that become how does Clearly get known for that because of what you're building there?
Yeah. I mean, the first process was bringing the right kids as far as talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that I can bring in a kid that's been wrestling for 2 years and make him ranked in the country, right? Like the guy that's ranked in the country right now, like he's a Michigan guy, but he's a four-time state finalist. He came in from a D1 school, all that good stuff, right? So that's a huge step, right? And all the other guys that I know they're going to be ranked in the country at some point this year, like they're in a very, very similar situation as far as the success that they had in high school and all that good stuff, right? Um, uh, to keep it going, because we have that type of talent, making sure that not just me, but the captains are talking about the culture that we need to create, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that I was very, very, like, after I kind of took a step back and I thought about it, I was very grateful of not having a lot of kids on the team. Because
Right.
if I came into, 30 something guys on the roster and the culture was just crap, that's going to be a whole different animal to
Hard.
deal with,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
I was essentially kind of handed an empty canvas, and I was able to kind of just do what I wanted to do, right?
Right.
Like when I hopped in, there was two bad apples. I got rid of those guys and kind of moved forward and made sure that everyone was on the same page, right? Obviously I try to develop them and make them grow. And ultimately going through that process and still putting the time into that group, even though we weren't going to win any duels because we had freaking four guys wrestling. I was still able to kind of get them ready because some of those guys are seniors now, and now they're able to be a good partner for the big hammers that are here now, right?
Right.
I think culture is a huge thing because I mean you got to have that winning culture, right? Because winning
course.
doesn't happen from just the practices I tell them to go to and the lifts I tell them to go to, right? What type of extra work are they doing? What type of social decisions are they making? How are they taking care of their bodies? What type of nutrition? Are they stretching? All these different things, right? There's so many different aspects that come into winning a national title. And so having that culture and not just me telling them, but I got a group of captains that are ready to get on someone's butt and tell them, hey, that's stupid, right?
Yeah.
Like we have a couple of months. I had a conversation with my guys today. We have 3 months at this point. 3 months. What are you willing to sacrifice in 3 months to win a freaking national title, right?
Right.
And not just for yourself, but for this team, right? Because I'm telling you right now, we got some freaking talent, and we're gonna be up there, right? But it's not gonna just happen, right? It's not gonna be handed to us.
Correct. Yep.
So culture is a huge part as well, and that's something that whenever like if you remove me out of the situation, if the culture is there, it doesn't matter who takes over, right?
Yep.
And that's how a legacy is built, right?
For sure.
And that's what we're doing, right? That's in the process.
Of course. And do you think that, I know you mentioned like the bad apples and you coming into a program and in your situation kind of starting with a clean slate. But I guess realistically, and you mentioned earlier about how you get a guy who was like a D1 guy, or he came from a different college. But do you ever like, I guess this is my final recruiting question, I think. Do you go after guys that are like JUCO level who have like, are you looking at the JUCO national
I'm looking at everything, man.
tournament, everything?
That's one thing that I learned my first year because I had such small numbers, right?
Yeah.
My concern for that first year, I needed to bring anyone and everyone to the school. Otherwise, they're going to get rid of our freaking program.
Hmm.
And I wasn't going to let that happen, right? So because of that, I kind of figured out a bunch of different ways to find kids and all that good stuff, right? So I'm looking at everything, right?
Everything.
I'm looking. I don't care if you're, in Michigan we have, D1, D2, D3, D4. I don't care what you are, right? I don't care what state. I don't care if you're JUCO. I don't care. Honestly, I don't even care if you have a bad history. There are some kids that I talk to and I bring in and they have, some bad history, and I sit them down. I'm very transparent and honest. I sit them down and I tell them, look, you have one opportunity because I know your history. If you slip up, it's done, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking to anyone though, right? Like I
Yeah.
said before, the best part of this job that I love so much is that I get to help so many people, right?
For
So I'm
sure.
not going to
Yeah.
sit back and be like, you're not good enough, right? I'm not going to sit back like, you made a bad decision, right? I want to see who you are in person, right? I want to
Yep.
make sure I give you the opportunity. And if you mess up in front of me, then it's on you 100%, right? But yeah, I go through everything, man. Everything.
I love it. I love that you're transparent with your kids, and then also with trying to find athletes. So I mean, what kind of tips or advice do you have for new coaches that that might be nervous, or just in general new coaches of it? And this could be a general term, right? It could be, or you could specialize it, whatever. Or so I guess like on the yeah. So what tips or advice do you have for new coaches or struggling coaches?
Um, college, college coaches or coaches in general.
You could do it with whatever. I traditionally like in general, just because but it could be for I've had coaches who talk for like specifically towards college. I think it's
Yeah,
more of like how you take it, because
yeah,
coaching can be it's very general, right? Like we're all doing the same
yeah,
thing. It's just college is different, a little bit different than high school. It's what you do, right? Things like that.
yep,
But
yep,
like we might all face the same struggles, right? Like I have a
100%.
kid who's not listening. You might have a kid that's doing the same thing, or
Right.
academics, or don't really matter. So it's up to you how you take it. You
Yeah,
can answer
I
in whatever
mean,
way.
I think the something that comes to my mind is you know, look at the man in the mirror. Um, check yourself, and because if you, I mean, you gotta understand like this is a human being as well, right? You can't,
Yeah.
especially if someone isn't listening. Odds are they might have a little bit of a rough background. Usually people don't just naturally become an asshole, right? Usually there's something that is causing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if just because someone is acting up a little bit, if you just attack them and you approach them with some aggression, odds are they're not going to listen to you and they're going to come at you with some aggression as well,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
So I would say check yourself, right? Make sure that you're doing make sure that you're a coach for the right reason, right? I think this is a fantastic opportunity to talk about. There's too many people in a coaching position that shouldn't be in the coaching position, right?
Yeah.
And I truly believe that. I think there's a lot of people that let their ego come into play, and that's why they're a coach, right? Because they
Yeah.
want to see some success for themselves, and they don't care about their kids, right?
Yeah.
You should be a coach for the right reason because there's so many things that you're doing that impacts your guys, right? So everyone that's listening, right? Please look at the guy in the mirror. Please do it because
Yeah.
I mean, the beginning of the podcast, we're talking about guys that helped me out years ago, right?
Long time
Years
ago.
ago. We're
Yeah.
talking, almost 10 years
Almost-
ago,
Yeah.
depending on where it is over 10 years ago, like years ago. And I still remember them. And I still love those guys to freaking death. Um, like they've done so much for me, but it's because they don't let their ego come to play and they were
Yeah.
doing everything right to help me out, right? Not to help themselves out, right? I lived with multiple coaches because they opened their arms up for me, right?
Yeah.
They helped me get to school, right? And there's so much that goes into it, dude. But 100%, you got to check yourself and make sure that you're doing your job for the right reason, right?
And
Yeah,
and you mentioned like the youth thing. Yeah, I mean, or from middle school, you know, I know my kid, he and my physical kid, my oldest, he didn't want to do sports because, granted, whenever I was younger, and I'll be 100% honest, anybody who talks to him or whatever, they're gonna know like I was pretty hard on him at like 6 or 7, right? As just thinking whatever. But realistically, I've learned like I can't live through him. So then like
right,
now that I've just kind of let him progress in the sport or whatever he's doing, he's had some really shitty coaches, to be 100%
right.
honest. And he wanted to quit doing the sports. So I
And
stepped
that's a
in,
problem.
and it is. And this was baseball too, right? So like I knew I was pretty good at baseball growing up. Like I didn't do that past junior year of high school, right? So like whatever. That's why I do wrestling and whatever. But long story short, I stepped in to coach his baseball last year, and that's why I'm coaching my littler ones now, because I'm like, I don't want them to experience that, because the sports are supposed to be fun, specifically, at that age, right? Like sub 12 really should be about fun. Like 12, 13, like all right, you're transitioning into maybe more serious, but really like it's still supposed to be fun until and even high school is supposed to be fun, but really like obviously we know high school is when things really should transpire, right? But really, that age, sub 12, was all fun, and he didn't have that. So I think that what you are mentioning about middle school is like the perfect time to have a really good coach, because either you're going to keep doing it from 13 on or you're done, right? And so it's important to be a good coach and do it for the right reason. So I just had to mention that because that's 1,000% facts. You have to be a good coach, or you have to be doing it for the right reasons, but also know why you're doing it, right? Like these are 6, 7, 10, 12-year-old kids that are either going to love it or hate it because of you, right? So
Right.
you kind
Right.
of have to.
No one's going back and watching film on a 12, 11, 10-year-old, right?
Yeah,
No one's gonna
yeah.
go back and watch your Little League World Series. Like, calm down, coach. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you're okay, man.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's cool that you won you won a state championship in seventh grade Yaffle, but
Right.
really,
Right.
let's talk about when you get to varsity high school, right? And not to take away from them, but yeah, 100% agree. So that leads me to essentially my last question on what I have written down, anyways, and it's the name of the podcast. It's like we keep talking about. What do you do? We do it for the right reasons. I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I guess it's my favorite question is why did you get into this profession? What is your why?
My why is 100%. Well, a combination of two things, right? One, I absolutely love the sport of wrestling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, I want to help people, right? I said this before when I was going through the process of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, my career. When I was kind of getting close to graduating college, there was the one big thing that I was thinking of, right, was helping people, right?
Right.
Um, and I knew that I love wrestling. I knew I wanted to be around wrestling regardless of what I was going to do in my life. But obviously that was my plan A, was to be a coach so I can have the best of both worlds, right? I get to be around tournaments, the kids, the sport, but then also being able to help them in a number of different ways, right? But obviously, being around the sport itself, that's kind of helped me there, right? But helping people, there's so many different ways that I'm doing it, right? There's, I get to make these boys into men. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I am the last step before they are released to their life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where they're not with mom and dad anymore, right? They're when they're done with me, they're moving on, and they're buying their first. They're living in an apartment by themselves for the first time, or they're buying a house finally, or they're getting their freaking big boy job, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
what I'm helping with, right?
Right.
And that's the stuff that I'm all about, right? And hopefully, and we're gonna do everything in our power to win a national title. We're gonna do everything in our power to get on the podium, but that's okay, right? Because at the
Yep.
end of the day, the big goal is to make you the best possible person possible, right? On and
Hell
off the
yeah.
mat, right?
Hell yeah.
That's my why.
You got me all hyped up, sure. I got 1 year eligibility left. You need a heavy? You need a heavy?
Come on in, man.
Hell yeah.
As long as you like the cold.
Hey, where I went to school at, it was cold in Colorado where I went. It was my senior year or my junior year, it got -40, and then it got with wind chill -60. So I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying you won't hear me complain, but I got you. No, I appreciate it, man. This was a really good episode. If you guys are still listening, make sure, if you guys are on YouTube, make sure you guys like, subscribe, all the 9 yards. If you guys are an audio listener, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, PocketCasts, wherever you are, make sure you guys leave a review, hit those stars, tell us what you have to think. Whatever you say it with your chest, because we want to hear what you have to say. Coach, I would love to have you back on for another one. Maybe towards the off season, whenever there's a little bit more time for you. But I appreciate you jumping on. It was a good one.
Yeah, 100%, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Where can these guys follow you at? Whoever's coaches, kids, whoever's listening to, where can they follow Coach Santos at?
Yeah, I mean, myself, my main thing is Instagram.
Okay.
But mainly, I would appreciate if you guys follow Cleary University Wrestling on everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I take care of Instagram mainly. I'll post some highlight film on there or make some reels or whatever, right? But yeah, follow all those pages. Keep track of us, because I'm telling you right now, Cleary University Wrestling's coming.
Hell yeah. You got it hyped up right here, man. If you didn't like this episode, you didn't like what we have to say, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. Coach, I really appreciate you jumping on today. With that being said, thank you guys for listening. Peace.